I'm in. I've scribbled all over them.
Right, good morning everyone. Welcome to the board of the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. I think it's going to be the hottest day of the year, so it's, everyone enjoy that. So look, why don't we start with today's business. Can we start with apologies? I think we have apologies from Neil Cameron, who is, I believe, in a planning inquiry for a couple of weeks, so apologies from Neil. Nick, I can see you are with us, so you weren't called to your jury service. It's good to have you with us, but your time will come, no doubt. We are still waiting for the leader of Kent County Council to nominate a new representative from Kent County Council, so we do not have that representative on this session. Are there any declarations of interest that people would like to cover off? No? Then we come on to our minutes of our board meeting of the 19th of May 2021, which we have in front of us. Can I assume that those are duly approved, everyone? Yeah. So I'll assume those are approved, and then I think we're just going to move down to matters arising and action points coming off the back of those, our board action log. There are just a couple I would like to cover off on there. Bear with me. EDC to seek legal advice from Gowling on planning committee member involvement in future board decisions. There's been quite an extensive discussion around this, and I think we're awaiting further written advice, but we do want to err on the side of extreme caution here. So I think it's Neil, who chairs our planning committee, will not be involved in decisions which relate to planning applications by the Development Corporation as we develop our thinking around that at a board session or otherwise. So he will have to excuse himself from those as he chairs the planning committee. And Daniel, I think we will, you likewise will avoid being, what we will be doing actually is taking you from the planning committee so that you can focus on the board evolutionary work on our planning applications, and we will look to replace you in due course with one of the new EDC appointees. Yeah. So I think the timing of Ebbsfleet Central planning applications and decisions on that means that you will be off the planning committee by the time that you have to consider that or other EDC planning applications on the planning committee.
Either that or in the case of the Ebbsfleet Central application that we might be discussing in the course of today, I could be replaced for the purpose of that meeting. We can discuss that as it arises. There isn't, the conflict only arises and needs to be managed when the planning committee actually meets.
Absolutely, indeed, just so. But I think the general approach is that we will have you dropping the side of the board evolution of our planning applications, but Neil will stay chairing the planning committee, so won't be able to be involved in the progress and development at the board level. So that is that. We are clearly looking for site visit opportunities to be arranged for the board. That will be delayed somewhat by the announcement by the Prime Minister earlier on this week, but as soon as we can, we will be doing that. We had hoped that our board meeting on the 21st of July, because we have our forward look for 2021, would take place in Ebbsfleet. I think we are going to make that a virtual meeting, which means that our first actual physical meeting together would be on the 15th of September board meeting, again, because that would fall perilously close to the next review point in respect of unlocking on the 21st of July. Otherwise, just to say that we had a very positive meeting with the housing minister who came to EDC about 2 weeks ago. I know that you've all been sort of briefed on that. I think he was extremely impressed with the progress that had been made on the Garden City. I think was extremely impressed as well with just the scale of it. I think it's, he was really quite taken aback by the scale and the progress of the Garden City. So I think that was very positive. There's quite a lot of social media around that. I'm sure we'll cover that off later. And then we took the opportunity to go with him to the Berkeley Homes Modular Factory and have a look at that, which likewise was impressive. So I think that's all part of increasing the sort of level of involvement of the department in the Development Corporation and Garden City. And I think as soon as we have got to a complete unlocking situation, I'm going to be asking the Housing Minister to join us at one of our board meetings, either physically or virtually, to give the board an opportunity to engage with him personally as well. So I think that was very positive. So I think that just goes to our action points, which takes us to our first piece of business today, the Chief Executive's Part 1 Strategic Report. Ian.
Thank you, Simon. And morning, everybody. Yeah, thank you. My report this month covers a number of matters. I wanted, because we're a little bit short of time across the whole of the morning, just wanted to pick up a couple of things. Obviously, at the time of writing, the government hadn't made its formal announcement about deferring the easing the last remaining restrictions. So the advice remains at the moment until changed that we should continue to work from home. We had put in place a plan, as it says at paragraph 2.1, to be able to open the office up to staff on a gradual basis. That plan will just be delayed until we are able to do that. We will still operate the same plan or implement the same plan, but just doing it slightly later. So that's all in hand and in place. The next item in my paper is the staff survey results, which we have done roughly once a year, every 18 months. The results are there for you. As you can see, we've given a comparison against the previous year's results, but also benchmarked against MHCLG and the wider civil service. That's information we can readily get hold of. From that, I think you will see that overall the results are very positive about the staff engagement, their level of pride in working for the organisation, and their very clear sense of what the objectives and the mission is. Obviously, there are always areas for improvement in an organisation, and we are currently working through and developing an action plan to address some of those areas where the scores suggested we were relatively, they were still reasonably good scores, I think, by comparison of benchmarks, but where we can improve even further. One of those, I think, being the cross-team working. That's obviously not been helped, particularly in the last 12 months, with just not being in the office, not being able to have those sort of more informal interactions. But as I say, we're developing an action plan to address some of those areas where there is room for some improvement, and we'll bring that back to the board when we've actually done that. Then at section 4, it's a reporting of the note and the wider discussions we had about housing strategy. So that's really putting that on the record, and we've incorporated that discussion and that note into the draft corporate plan, which appears later, as you hopefully will have seen. I think, Simon, I'll stop there and see if there are any questions. I can see my internet's playing up today as well, so I appear to be breaking up a little bit. I hope you can all hear me okay.
Yes, you're loud and clear. Can I bring in David first?
Great, and thanks for that, Ian. And yes, I agree. I think the staff survey is very positive, particularly when you compare it against the benchmarks. I think the one other area that maybe it highlighted for me was around some of our management skill sets, some of our leadership and management skill sets, and perhaps we do need to give some thought as we've grown our headcount, as we've become slightly more complex in terms of the interactions and some of the skills that we're now managing, how we ensure that we're delivering those sort of development programs to our managers to enable them to manage teams in what is quite a complex environment.
Yeah, it's a great point. Thank you, David.
Daniel, can I bring you in, please?
Thanks. Just going back to the health, safety and well-being at the beginning of the report, I do hope the staff appreciate how much, how grateful we are to them for going through this rather difficult time and achieving so much nonetheless. We do regard this as a very important area, the welfare and the well-being of the staff, and I'm glad to see that we're treating it as positive and sensitive a manner as possible. I did just want to ask, are we aware of any problems? I'm not asking about individual names, of course, but are we aware of any general problems or things we could be doing better as this wretched lockdown drags on and people are disrupted?
I think probably like many organisations, what we have seen over the last 18 months is that for some staff working at home, being more isolated from work colleagues, has proved much more of a challenge for their own personal well-being. And we've been very cognizant of that. We've provided a range of support, and around there's lots of support that we look to. We tap into the MHCLG support networks as well. One of the things that we have said, Daniel, throughout is that if people feel that actually going into the office would be beneficial for their own well-being, then that has been permitted. Now, some staff have taken advantage of that. A small number have taken advantage of that, and when the reports that I've had from those members of they found that hugely beneficial, just to be able to get out and into the office into a different space. So yes, I mean, it is something we've taken very seriously. I think throughout this 18 months, again, in common with lots of other organisations, a real focus has been placed on staff welfare. It's been a very strange and unusual time for us all, hasn't it? So it's required much more focus, a lot of specific focus, I would say. And I think that's been good for us because it's enabled us to put in place structures and mechanisms that we will simply carry forward into times when hopefully there are, sort of less challenges coming from a specific of the pandemic, but nevertheless, those support networks will be needed on an ongoing basis. So,
thank you.
Great, thank you. Bob, can I bring you in, and then Louise?
Thanks, Chairman. I just really want to say I've been involved in a lot of governmental organisations the last 15, 20 years. I've never seen such a positive survey, positive staff survey, and I think we should note that. It's a very, very positive result. I may have been involved in some low morale organisations, I don't know, but I'm very impressed by this survey. But I did want to pick up the same point that David picked up. We are only a small organisation, so we really shouldn't have a problem with team working, really, in such a small organisation with only 2 or 3 very important and very large and complicated projects. But I do think we need to address that as we go forward, given that we are a very limited resource and we need to make sure we're getting the best out of it. So hopefully we can have a good look at that quite quickly.
yeah. Thank you, Bob. Yep.
Right, Louise.
Yeah, just picking up on that point again, on the not siloing as such, but the cross working. Obviously, in the past, the integration between different work streams and different functions has been managed in governance terms through the meeting that you have, Ian, I guess, with your directors. And I thought the same. As we've grown larger and things are slightly more complex now, there's a lot more overlapping. You know, we're not at the starting points of all these streams of work. They're now crossing over a great deal more and impacting on each other, as we're seeing. We're getting into the more complex end of things. And I just wondered whether it was considering, and it has been made more difficult by the pandemic and working online, but it's whether there need to be other cross-functional meetings at the level below director, rather than assuming it'll all be picked up. And maybe that's what you were sensing in the survey. But yeah, kind of all to play for. The other point I wanted to make, picking up on something Daniel said, and I just think we need to think about this in September moving forward. It's a lot easier for somebody like me not to feel disconnected from the team. So Daniel, you say, are there specific issues that have arisen? Well, of course, I know that there are, but that's because after 7 years, I have personal relationships with some of the directors. And that does mean that they've been able to say, can I give you a quick call? Can I pop you a quick email? You know, and it's been difficult times, and in other boards, the NEDs have sort of just step down a level just to get into that. But with so many new people, you haven't built those personal relationships yet. And I do think in September when we meet, there probably needs to be more of a focus on that, in building those personal relationships, because that in the pandemic situation, I've had lots of one-to-one calls and reaching out and what do you think about this? But that's because it leverages off the long-term relationships that were built over 6 years. So we probably need a real push in September to get those more informal working relationships going across the board, particularly in light of the fact that the three of us will leave at the end of the year.
Thanks for that, Louise. Can I just, Simon, if I may pick up the first point about cross-team working. So absolutely, Louise, we don't rely on the director meetings for that. About probably 18 months ago now, we put in place a fairly comprehensive project governance arrangements with project boards and working groups. And we also have something called the place board, so, which doesn't look at projects but looks at placemaking more generally and ideas and creation. So one of the main objectives for me in putting that revised governance arrangements in place, not only to make sure we had good governance for this, you know, effective decision making, etc., was to further support cross-team working. So you have teams coming together at working group level, then at the project board level, etc. When we set that up, I committed to reviewing how that was working after 6 or 12 months. I've just commissioned that review now, so that is underway. And one of the objectives I've given for that review is how effective is it addressing the cross-team working, and if that's not working effectively, what do we need to do to make it better? So no, you're absolutely right, we don't rely on the director group for that.
Thank you, Ian. Nick, your hand was up, but right, okay, I'm going to just make a couple of points and then I think we'll move on from this. But I think just to echo Bob's point, that I think this is a very strong survey. I think there are a couple of areas which come out to me, and I've also got comments from Neil Cameron as well on a couple of the board papers. I suppose the first one is question number 6. MHCLG as EDC sponsor provides the support that EDC needs to deliver its objectives. I think there's been an improvement here, you know, which is more positive, because there was quite a lot of disagreement in the prior one, and that has reduced, and those people have gone to kind of a neutral mindset, neither agree nor disagree. I think this has slightly come through from the board review as well, that we need to kind of strengthen our relationship into MHCLG and their visibility. So Ian, if you could mention this to their team there. I know we've invited them over in a way from a ministerial level just to have a look around. So the way that we can, you know, perhaps, you know, build something into when they come and join us in the Garden City to, so that all of our employees get an opportunity to interact with them. I think this is an area that we need to do a little bit of work on. And then there is generally the way that teams work across the development corporation and the directors group. I think that's something that we need to focus on, Ian, to improve the overall employee survey. But I think it's positive, and I completely echo the points which have been made by Louise and others about strengthening our relationships with the people who work for the development corporation moving forward, and that will be easier hopefully as we unlock. So I'm going to assume that we've given that a good amount of scrutiny and commented on it. That paper is for information, so it is duly noted. Thank you, everyone. And then we're going to move on to our EDC draft corporate plan 2021-25. Ian, this is you again.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. So this is just the next iteration. Hopefully, clearly not the final, because there is still elements of it that we need to insert. But in terms of text and content from the corporation's point of view, we're seeing this as a near final draft. The board have seen previous iterations. We built up to this point. The board saw a framework. The board saw a fairly fullish draft last month and provided some helpful comment. We've reflected on that, made amendments. We've added in the section regarding housing delivery. I think we're still waiting for any feedback comments from the ministry, but we'll subject to those. This is just would like to invite any sort of further comments on the draft as it stands. I think following today, if the board are content with this as a near final version, we'll await the final or any comments from the ministry. We will obviously look to get a ministerial forward from the minister, and then we would have the document designed up into a professional looking document. So it's really just any final comments or any comments on this near final draft, Simon. Thank you.
Ian, thank you. Board, a lot of work has gone into this already. I think it's in reasonable shape, but are there any final observations before we give it to graphic designers to wow us with their presentation of this? No, Ian, it would appear that the substance of it is fully supported by the board. I wonder whether when we've got the ministerial forward, when we've got the graphic design, which will clearly present it in a far more attractive light, whether we could just pop it around to the board just for them to have a final look at before this is something that does it come back to the board to be formally adopted or not?
We could do that, Simon. I think that would be, once it's a complete document, that would make sense, because I do, clearly there are some minor elements, but not that the ministerial forward is minor at all, but we've got some plans to put in there and things like that. So I think it would be appropriate for the board to see it in its absolute final form before we press the button and send it to the printers. Great.
Okay. Look, hopefully if everyone's supportive, why don't we bring it back when we've got it completed, signed off by MHCLG, fully designed, just for us to have a final look and press the button and then publish it. So I'm sure everyone will be in agreement with that. Great. All right. That is all. So there is a decision here. The board is asked to discuss and agree this draft of the corporate plan so that it can be submitted to MHCLG for approval, and so the design work and the final version can commence. Can I assume that everyone's happy with that?
Agreed.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for their hard work there. That then brings us on to Ebbsfleet Living. Kevin, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, we're short of time this morning, so I was just going to invite questions on the report. The only change from the report being sent to board members is the fact that obviously opening up has now been delayed by 4 weeks. So some of our events that we were starting to think about in July will not proceed with, but we have got events sort of planned for early August, and hopefully that will be something we can start doing to see the Garden City opening up. But apart from that, I'm just happy to take any questions on the report that was submitted.
May I? Sorry, I'm going to press my hand. There we are.
Yes, you're there, Daniel, and then we'll go to Jeremy.
I was very impressed by the paragraph 312 and the choir. I think that's a marvellous thing, and that those are people from the community.
Yes, absolutely. We've been trying to galvanise the choir for some time. This has given a bit of focus. It did have a slight delay again because the choirs were one of the things that were highlighted that couldn't meet in person recently. But we've been trying to find our way around that, and there's a real enthusiasm from local residents to get involved.
That's tremendous. And where do they sing? Or rather, putting COVID to one side, I won't ask where they sing at the moment because that would obviously be constrained. Where is it intended that they should sing?
At the minute, they're going to have to use the community centres that are existing. However, we are very much aware that they're not very good for acoustics, so that has been an issue for us locally, and obviously that's why we're looking at some of our future community buildings to have better acoustics. But at the minute, they're using the existing community facilities that we have.
Well, I think there's quite a strong case here for what I've suggested before, is that Ebbsfleet would benefit from a concert hall and music venue, which could be used both by local amateurs and by performers, more professional performers. But I'll come back to that, no doubt, when the opportunity arises. But it was very encouraging.
Thank you.
Very impressive.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Thank you, Chairman. This is really an umbrella comment which relates to 2C, 2D and 2E, but let me raise it here. I love all these this explosion of different projects that are happening. I'm sorry I couldn't come to the last community board, but I love the way that all these things are emerging. But the one thing I've noticed is that when we communicate with them, the branding at the bottom, or the branding of our involvement, seems to vary from time to time. I'm just wondering whether we could do a very quick and dirty exercise just to make sure that although the top 80% of all our posters and our leaflets are always explosive with the correct and sympathetic communications of the project, the bottom bit of it is always the same. So perhaps we can develop a bit of a frame for our leaflets and our communications, so that the family of EDC events can be linked together. I know that some do it and some achieve it, but others don't. And I think it'd be important for us, as we start to do more and mature more, for us to make sure that there is a connection to all of these events with EDC and with not EDC, but with the Garden City, so that people do link them together.
Yep. Thanks for that, Jeremy. I'll pick that up.
Good. And Daniel, I think that is a legacy hand, but we've got Nick.
Sorry. Quite right.
Yes, I was just going to congratulate on the fundraising cultural co-location plan, and this must be the place. Really great results, and many congratulations to you and the team, Kevin.
It's very much our colleague Laura, who's going to come on to the next paper, actually has been leading that. So,
right, excellent. Just before we move on from this paper, perhaps just to pick up a little bit on Daniel's point about a performance space for the Garden City. Just to mention that the new leisure centre that we built in Maidenhead, which I think was in the region of 38 million pounds, that itself had a performance space within it, I think, for up to 800 people, which could be used for school speech days, but also as a performance space. So it actually was an extremely efficient way of building in that type of facility within an overall kind of leisure complex facility. So I just kind of flag that. That's one way to go, but I'm sure we'll be able to identify other ways to go as well. But just to cover off on that point, which I think Daniel was very well made there. So Kevin, as always, I think we're going to note your report. Thank you for all the great work. As we eventually get to our terminus point, which is our great unlocking, we look forward to you upping your level of community activity as well. So thank you.
Just to come back on that point, Simon, we are exploring actually in the Alkington Hub opportunities to use the faith space that will be within that building and maybe add to it to create a music venue that would be suitable for acoustics and things. So that's part of the co-location work that Nick mentioned. We're saying if you've got spaces like a faith space, let's work on them to make them work harder. And that's the one we are exploring at the minute. Could that be a kind of music performance space or have some kind of focus on that? So that's, again, we'll come back to you with some more detail as that evolves.
Well, I'm sure as Dan and I are imminently going to be the initial directors trustees of Ebbsfleet Garden City Trust, we'll be delighted to hear that we're going to be looking to sweat our assets, to use an expression. Fantastic. Look, thanks for all the hard work on that, Kevin. We, I think, have noted that report, and that then brings us on to Ebbsfleet Garden City Arts and Culture update. Is this going to be Laura or you again, Kevin, on this one?
Yes, so I'm joined by Laura, and both of us will answer our questions, but Laura will take the lead on this one.
Hi, Laura. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to share what we've been doing around arts and culture. Hopefully you've all had a chance to have a look at the paper. It's really an overview of what we've been doing over the last few years to embed a cultural placemaking approach. And it sets out our strategy and just some examples of how we've been delivering on that strategy. Nick's already picked up on a couple of the projects, the cultural co-location work and This Must Be the Place. So as we are short of time, I just would like to invite any questions.
Board, are there any questions here? Observations, comments? Jeremy, can I start with you, please?
Yeah, thank you. I always put my foot in it with these things because I've got strong views about arts and communities, and I always defer to professionals who deliver. And nothing I say in the next 30 seconds ought to be taken as any criticism of the work itself. But I do see from my own experience sometimes that when you have a budget of £100, it's very easy to spend a disproportionate part of it on fees in delivery of arts and cultural projects rather than the actual delivery. And I was wondering whether one of the ways of keeping particularly me sane and happy going forward might be whether the board would consider having a notional consideration of what kind of percentage of our arts and cultural spending ends up in the hands of fees and consultancy, because I don't even mind what it is actually, as long as there is a kind of a limit to it and we understand where we stand, because I've been involved in a number of cultural projects where it's very clear that the fees and the consultancy amounts have kind of disappeared off into the horizon, leaving actually rather pitiful amounts for local delivery. And I'm not suggesting that's what we're going to do here, but I think it would give comfort and also provide a signal to incoming suppliers and partners that this is the way we like to work. We like to make sure we leave a legacy, we leave impressions, and we have events on the ground that really work. And that whilst we value, of course, we value their professionalism and their input and their work, we do have this kind of notional limit about how much we'll spend compared to the spend on the party. So basically, it's about, think of it as a wedding. It's how much we spend on the wedding and how much we spend on the organizer. And so that I just float that idea. But without any criticism, I love the idea. I love all the things we're doing. The work to get this money in has been tremendous, and it's an extraordinary tribute to everyone involved that we've got this amount of money. I just want to make sure we spend it on the community, or a large part of it on the community, not on consultants and fees, basically.
Jeremy, point well made. Laura, could I perhaps bring you back in on that one before we go to Louise?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I fundamentally agree. You know, we do try to make sure that the budget that we spend is appropriate to what we're delivering, and we try to work with as many local artists and local organisations as possible, and make sure that money is going to them for delivery. Obviously, where we're spending money over a certain value, then we have to go through a competitive tender process, and so we can't specify that somebody has to be local. It has to be open. But what we're trying to do is build up a network of local practitioners to work with. There are existing small arts organisations and individuals locally that we're aware of, and we work closely with them. But we're also finding that new people who have creative skills are moving into the area. So it's really a case of, you know, galvanising them to deliver, a lot of this work themselves. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be led by EDC. I think part of my job is to to work with local practitioners and give them the skills to lead and deliver this work and decide what it is they want to do. So I hope that answers the question to an extent.
So just to follow up from Laura's comment on that, then, just to give you a sense of the scale of it, and most of the work that we've, and the 1.2 million that we've mentioned, most of the work is being delivered by others, and where we've made a grant contribution to them making a bid to Arts Council or others. So in other words, we've made a modest contribution to somebody else making a bid to Arts Council. This must be the place is a good example. So, we're then not responsible for, we have a working group and we look at how they're spending their money together, but we as EDC make a modest contribution. The leverage thus far has almost been something like 7 to 1. So for every pound we've spent, we've been levered in £7. In terms of our actual spend on events and consultants, EDC has only ever commissioned 2 events in our lifetime that we've actually had consultants come in and do for us. The rest of them we've done through the community or with my staff and our team, which is very resource heavy. So we do like to get a balance. And actually, when we've asked the community board, they do like to have us supporting local people to do their own things. But people do also value having this citywide, larger scale events. And at the minute, we're sort of proposing 1 to 2 of those maximum per year. However, our preferred approach is, where possible, to get other local artists and local groups like Cement Fields to make bids to deliver activity in our area.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Louise, could I bring you in, please?
Hi, I'm going to have the same front runner as Jeremy. So and maybe I've got the wrong end of the stick on this and I've missed it in the paper. But there does seem to be this great trend when it comes to art and culture that it's led by the community. And I don't have an issue with that. But I can see that there are potentially many positives, but also potentially some negatives with that. And the other sense that I picked up on, so it's like, where does that other thought, the sort of almost the outsider sprinkling of ideas, not forced in, but sprinkling of ideas that makes it a tiny little sprinkle of something that makes it vibrant and initiates those ideas. So where does that come from? And then also there was this grand sense of it being very experiential. And look, again, 80-20, I think that's great. But there's something quite nice about the landscape and the place having some lasting mark of art in particular within it. And what I'm talking about here, I'm contrasting going to Beijing and walking around their Olympic Park, where they had commissioned artwork from every competing nation. And there was so much of it. It was so different. It told different stories as you went around. There wasn't so much on the Olympic Park, but there were little sprinklings of it. And I was thinking of the modern trend now. They don't have to be big, but, somebody who produces tiny little mosaics that are sprinkled around a town or a city that then become fitting with the healthy new towns, a trail that you then go and have to discover them. And they might be redolent or tell a story of the history, the bear pit, and somehow you've got the mix of history and art and exercise, but there's like a physical manifestation of it. And it could be lots of little small things, like the brass heads that are implanted all around East London that people go and find on a walk in the summer. Or it could be one big thing where people say, have you been down and seen the whatever it is? And I feel that there's a really strong guide towards, self-seeding from the community-led, which is great, but is that limiting? And also experiential over physical. And I'm not saying that we've necessarily got the balance wrong. It's just I was struggling in the papers, and I apologise, as I say, if I've missed it. I didn't see any of those sort of elements necessarily shown in there, and I think they are still, you know, we don't want to be spending all the budget on a physical piece of art, expensive piece of artwork, but we might want to think about like how that is represented within the community. So you do still, that's something that when you go there says there's art happening here in the physical sense as well as the experiential.
Yeah, very.
Can I ask Kevin and Laura to come back on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our strategy, we have said that we want to, you know, to deliver a community-led approach, but it's combined with what we call a curated approach. So we very much want to do both of those things, Louise, that you mentioned. So, you know, to kind of bring in some excitement and surprise and wonder, you know, for people, because it's really great to kind of just come across something that you're not expecting, whether it's something experiential or a piece of public art. So we are trying to develop that approach. And so the community side, the community-led side, is we think is really important, because what we don't want to do is just sort of helicopter things in and you know, and it's not really what people want. But at the same time, we want to take people on a journey, you know, so that they aspire to have more and better and more interesting and exciting and ambitious things. So that's very much our approach to do that. Obviously, my role is to you know, to bring some of those things in and work with other professionals to do that. Just on the experiential versus physical, there is a lot of public art coming forward, although it's not EDC that is responsible for bringing it forward. So it is through the developers' obligations. And so I do work with the developers on bringing forward those pieces of public art. Most development sites now have a public art panel, which is made up of a range of people, including myself, including residents and developers and planners, etc. And we are having discussions about how we can connect all those pieces together through an art trail, which again, you know, is kind of ticks that box of trying to get people active, but also, you know, kind of you know, the place having an identity through its public artworks. So I don't know, Kevin, you want to add to that?
Yeah, and just to say, actually, at the minute, the Cloud9 Festival, which is one of our examples, is part of the Estuary 21 Festival, which is across the whole Thames Estuary at the minute. So over the last 3 weeks, there have been fabulous activities and events and art around the whole area, including in Ebbsfleet Station, in Northfleet, in Dartford and in Gravesend. So there has been a really nice mix in that festival of both the experiential of all sorts of different mediums and physical things in our area. So that's kind of the start, and some of that came through this must be the place work as well. So if you look at our 3 strands of work, it's kind of picking up all 3 of the points. Daniel, in terms of buildings, that's the infrastructure bit. It's for Jeremy in terms of our community-led approach, and then the third bit is the practitioner approach. So we've kind of picked on those 3 areas, and that basically makes our strategy. And some of them we've done more in than others, but over the coming years, that's what we really want to build on that. So it's very encouraging that those are the 3 areas you've all picked up on as the areas that we want to address.
Thanks very much. That's really helpful to hear a bit more context. That's great. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we've had a good discussion around that piece. The paper itself is for noting. Laura, Kevin, thank you for all your hard work on this and continued work on this. So I suggest we move on to Mark and our communications update. Mark, please.
Yeah, there's nothing further to add, Simon, other than what's contained in my report. Thank you.
Excellent. That's going to help us advance the matters there, Mark. Are there any observations on the communication update? Busy as always, but the information is contained within the report. Board, any comments? I think we are duly noting that. That then, thank you very much for that, Mark. That will then just bring us on to the planning and housing report. Can we just have that one, please? Who's taking this one in?
Mark Pullin. I can see he's on the call. He's muted at the moment.
I think we moved through communications so quickly that we have.
Are you there, Mark? I think we were probably intending to take any questions, if there are any. I don't know where Mark is.
Board, are there any questions? I have one which I noted, and also Neil noted, so I'll ask that in a second. But Board, any other observations?
Mark's just messaged me. His system's crashed at the moment, so he'll join us again shortly, I think. In the meantime, if you do have some questions, I'll try and answer them.
I think it was the low number of starts and completions during the course of this month. There was a question which came from Neil, which I noted as well. Just wondering whether Ian, you, or if Mark is able to get his technology working, can help us on that one.
I will have to ask Mark that one, I'm afraid. I did note that Neil had picked that up as well. Yeah. I mean, they do tend to go in cycles, and I mean, whether this or not is the case. Of course, what can happen is if developers have a year end in the end of March, they tend to rush a lot of stock through to achieve completions in March, and then you tend to have a bit of a lull for a month or two in the sort of couple of months after that. That might be the reason. Sometimes you get a block of apartments is all completed for 1 month, and then there's a lull. But if we can wait till Mark comes back on that one, I'll see if I can take any other questions.
So I suggest that we move. We'll circle back on that one.
Yeah. Okay.
So I suggest we move back to the investment plan update, and that's Julia. Julia, could you take us through this, please?
Sorry, apologies. I should have said right at the very beginning, Julia this week, so is an apology. So Julia's not here to present this paper today. Again, I'll stand in. I think I've got Laura on the call as well, so if there's any questions on the numbers, Laura will be able to help me out. But again, Simon, we were just like to invite any questions on it.
Are there any questions on the investment report? Again, this is for noting. No questions on that. We're going to take that for noted. I don't think Mark has joined us back again, so hoping that Gerard is with us for the finance and operations report.
I am.
Gerard, fantastic. Good to see you.
Good morning, all. No real updates apart from one significant piece of news, which is MHCLG have confirmed that we can retain and utilise our receipts that we generate in this financial year, which is excellent news.
Good. Oh, that is fantastic. Excellent. And we think that could be in the region of £1.5 million. Is that right, Gerard?
It could be more depending on the planning fee income. So we're obviously hopeful that lots of planning applications get submitted. So we'll keep that under constant review. So
we've got, just to add to that, Simon, we've got both capital receipts anticipated and Ardell receipts. It's great news that we've got that approval as early as we have in this year, because often it doesn't come. Sometimes we don't ask until much later in the year because we don't know we've got the receipts coming. But it gives us a much better fighting chance of actually identifying the right things to spend those additional receipts on. So we had a quite a lengthy discussion yesterday, our directors, about that, and looking to identify the right things to spend that on. So.
All right, great. Bob, can I bring you in, please?
It was just a quick question on the capital receipts. When are we likely to get CLG view on whether we can utilise capital receipts or not?
That's included in the approval they've just given us, Bob. So we've got that.
So that does mean we have a capital programme now of 22 million. Yeah.
Yeah, a bit less than that. Probably nearer 19, I would say.
Right, but we can spend any capital. It's not the figure that's fixed. It's up to us in terms of what capital we can release.
Yeah.
To affect our resource. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it'll be the balancing act of getting the receipts in, some of which are still in sort of at predicted levels. So one of which is the receipt from the CPO of the A2 land. We haven't settled the claim there yet, so we don't exactly know what the number is. But yeah, so we'll be balancing the receipts with our expenditure.
Great. I'm just wondering whether Mark has. Mark is now back with.
He has reappeared. Yeah.
Mark,
I am. Apologies. Just at the minute that I try and click my devices and they seem to freeze. So sorry about that, Simon.
All right. And also, what a waste of a excellent haircut you have there, Mark. So it's good to see you. I think just to circle back on the question we had from your paper was the low level of starts and completions for the month that were reported, and what the underlying facts may be there, and whether or not there's a trend that we should be concerned about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, part of the data this month, I suppose was incomplete. Ultimately, I probably should have made that point in the report. We received data, I know from Redrow, from Keepmoat, and from Countryside and Clarion, but certainly Countryside, for example, aren't doing any more completions at Ashton at the moment because they're at their starts phase. Keepmoat down at Cable Wharf had an awful lot of their completions last month, therefore then they're a little bit low this month. So I think that partly it was just the data that we received from those particular house builders. We'll obviously try and get a more complete picture for next month. And I obviously across the year, business plan number says 525. We've obviously had a really strong start. So so far there isn't anything to indicate that there'll be any particular sort of slowing down. I did just I suppose just want to make just a few extra points, if that's okay. I spoke to a couple of the developers recently, and it's interesting that consistently a lot of them are saying issues about materials, so timber, bricks, and then just a general concern about build cost rising. So we'll obviously do a little bit more interrogation of any sort of information that they can provide on that, but nothing that's translating from them into a change in starts and completions numbers at the moment.
Mark, we usually capture the units started but not completed figure, don't we? And that's we use that, Simon, as a sort of an indicator of what's in the pipeline for completions. Is that number?
So there's no dashboard this month because of the accessibility review of the document. So we will be providing one next month. It might look a bit different to the one from last month. So we haven't provided that in, but it's been generally floating around the 500 and something mark. So at the point that we started the year, there were essentially all of the homes that we were anticipating completing throughout the year were actually already started, and then there will be some other sites where hopefully that will allow us to go over and above that.
Great, thank you very much for that, Mark. We will note that in your section of the minutes of the meeting. I think just for completeness, I think we are noting the finance and operations report and the news around MHCLG and revenue there. And I have Bob just with a quick query.
Don't want to make work for Mark. It's just in another project I'm involved in. The house builders are also giving information on the address of the people who are inquiring to buy houses, and it's incredibly useful information to see where the buyers are coming from. And I just wonder, I don't know if they're keeping that information, which they could just pass on to us. I don't want to make work for people, but if they do seem to the house builders do seem to keep that information, and it's incredibly useful for a project to see where the people coming into the area are coming from.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely interesting. Whenever we've asked that before, the house builders have been concerned about GDPR and sort of data protection issues. But what they're usually able to do is provide a bit of a trend around general locations. So we can certainly take that away, Bob, and see if we can find some sort of general narrative about that. Yeah, fine.
All right, thank you very much for that. I think that then brings us to the end of the part one business of the meeting. Our responses to public questions will be published on our website later on today, I believe. So unless there are any other comments, then I think that concludes today's part one business, and we will stop recording. Thank you very much, everyone.
I must say, Mr. Chairman, what a splendidly chaired meeting it was, and this approach whereby it's assumed that we've actually read the papers. I know that's a safe assumption with every member of this board, and that we're brimming with questions, and that's what we want to get on with, is excellent. Wonderful.